Emperor Haile Selassie the first. Jah! Well, Haile Selassie the first and don't tell me long time. They sing we don't love to listen. Check this. Hey! Boom! Now until the philosophy which hold one race superior and another, hey, inferior, is finally and permanently discredited and also abandoned. Well, everywhere is war. Hey, it's such a war that until there are no longer, well, first, last, or second.
Good afternoon, YouTube. This is my third video in my series of videos that I'm doing to document my exodus from the Jehovah's Witness cult. The other part of my motivation for doing videos and touching on some subjects that I wanted to touch on in depth was that I wanted to give my voice to the ever-growing movement that is challenging the beliefs of this organization and its practices because they are harmful, they are destructive, and more importantly, they break families apart. I decided that I was going to make time. I didn't realize how much I would enjoy talking about the things that I had experienced. And one of the things I think you can tell is that it is a war. So besides the fact that I love reggae music, I think that this particular song sums up how I felt when I had to go up against a judicial committee and an organization that at that time I didn't cognitively know how much it was going to impact me. And I will explain that in detail. But before I do, if you're just joining my channel and you're watching this video because I talked about something that is near and dear to most people, and that is the shunning, the disfellowshipping of a member and how to overcome it. I want to explain a few things about me, and for those of you that actually watched in my videos, you probably already know this. I'm not hiding my face because I'm afraid of being outed as an apostate. I know a lot of people that actually do that, have that fear, but my reason is totally different. I have a high profile position. I can't even really go into detail on how high profile it is, but there's a lot of implications for me in terms of having my identity out on YouTube videos. So I simply cannot do that. But that doesn't mean that I can't lend my voice to the fight. I was hesitant about even doing the videos because I was like, I'm not a John Cedars. I'm not the ex-JW critical thinker, who are two really fantastic channels. If you've not watched them, you really should. And these are people that really go into detail, and I mean like down to, an actual convention, or I'm flabbergasted that they have a internet channel, and just basically go point by point and knock them down. And I think it's fantastic. I really didn't want to repeat that. I literally don't have the time to do that. My approach is more humanistic, it's philosophical, it's anecdotal, and that was my motivation. I wanted to come in another direction. I totally believe that beyond the facts, beyond the actual sermons they give and the points that they make are human beings that have to learn how to live and interact in a world when they have to get out of this belief system. And how do they do that without falling apart? Or my other thing was not letting it consume you. So one of the reasons that when I left the witness religion, which is a cult, I made a point in myself that I needed to do like a total cleansing of it. Like it had been so encompassing in my life that I didn't want to give it any more time and effort. So that kind of held me back a bit from even, making videos, even though the thought occurred to me, because I don't want this cult to have that type of imprint in me. But as I mentioned in my previous videos, the point of the matter is if you have a similar background to mine, you have to address it in some way. And I think the goal is to not let it overwhelm you and not to let it stop you from living. And that's always been my concern. I don't want this to take up too much of my mental time, my time with my family, with my partner, with my work, that I'm always running and doing videos on the side. First of all, I can't. Not only do I have a high profile position, I'm a boss. So I literally don't, but at the same time, it's kind of like once you start something, and for someone like me, I feel attached to it and I feel like I need to follow it through. And so I had to come up with a way that I would be able to address these things without it taking over my life or consuming me, because then I still feel like I'm giving a organization that I do not particularly like too much time, too much of my time, which is very, very precious. So but I do believe, but I believe that there is enough space in the world for people that actually do take the time to research and spend most of their time fighting the battle of showing down to the very nitty gritty where the false doctrines are and going through all of the changes in their publications. It's huge. It's huge. It's huge. So I thought that it might be good for me to sort of start with some realizations that I had about some of the group dynamics in the organization. And then I'm going to start my disfellowshipping story. I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to get back on here later today and finish it out. And then I feel like it's going to take me probably about 2 more videos to just get through the disfellowshipping story and my ability to walk away pretty much unscathed, and then start talking more about my personal journey and some of the epiphanies and realizations that I had. So one of the things that I've realized and realized after leaving the organization was that there's specific types of people that were once affiliated with the Jehovah's Witness religion. So there are people, and and the reason I'm sort of talking about this before I get into my disfellowshipping story is I think that it's relevant. And I think it's important for people that are out there to kind of learn, if you haven't already, that there are distinctions and you have to be careful. Some of the group issues that I saw in the congregation actually follow people outside the congregation. So if you don't want to get disfellowship, then you don't want to send a letter of disassociation, or you don't want them to force you out and label you apostate. You do what is called the fade away. You just stop going to Kingdom Hall. You don't have a judicial committee. You don't talk to anybody, and you're just considered inactive. A lot of people do that because they don't want people to not talk to them. If they actually saw them in the street, they still want to have access to their families. And I think for most people, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, for most people that were disfellowshipped, and they were disfellowshipped because they didn't want to be a part of the organization, or they were forced to disassociate themselves, they wanted to do the fade away. And actually, the fade away is normally what most people do in most religions. They don't have to go through some huge, you know, proclamation, or write some big letter, or stand before a group of people and talk specifically about why they don't want to be a part of it. Because the only times that you really need to do that is if you're in a marriage or you're in a job. Other than that, when people feel like, I've joined this of my own fruition, and I, no longer want to be a part of your church, or I no longer want to be a part of your mosque, so there's normally not some huge thing that goes on. That's not the case in the Jehovah's Witness religion. They are very, very controlling, and they use a lot of group controlling tactics to keep people in the organization. And that's one of the reasons that it is literally a cult. So, in the people that are faders, you have people that categorically do not want anything to do with the witness religion. And they're out there going to church or whatever. But there's actually also people that are faders that they don't want to be a part of the organization. I've actually found people that are faders that fall into the second group, but they're still what I call sympathizers. And you have to be careful with people that are still Jehovah's Witness sympathizers. Not saying that you can't have a good conversation with them, but in my experience, and this is also for people that are disfellowshipped, and this is very, very important to my story. Just because they're disfellowshipped and they don't want to be a part of this cult does not mean that they are not JW sympathizers. So let me explain to you why you need to be careful about JW sympathizers. They can be people that actually studied and never wanted to get baptized because they didn't want to get that far in it so that they would have this group having that much control on them. But in my opinion, the sympathizers are people that are a lot of times whistleblowers. And there are people that will turn you in. There are people that will write anonymous letters. And it's a phenomenon that I actually stumbled across in my own life and in my own family. But it wasn't the only time. I actually came across people that I had no idea they actually used to be Jehovah's Witnesses, and then they actually turned out to be JW sympathizers, and they were whistleblowers and people that would turn someone in. I do, from a psychological standpoint, I think it's kind of a syndrome. It's a Stockholm syndrome where they're suffering, so they want you to suffer as well, so they want to turn you in. So I'm not saying that that's a huge phenomenon, but I do, and I have seen it, and that has a lot to do with my story, and how I actually became disfellowshipped. And it's actually pretty interesting because it's not the typical Disfellowshipping story. So I actually had planned um, to leave the organization, and I think about the middle of my 17 years. I realized that this wasn't what I wanted to do, and I also realized that I had to come up with a plan. So I literally had, when I would come home from work, I wrote letters to every single member of my family, and I explained to them why I was leaving the religion. I stopped going to the Kingdom Hall only when I had to. Let me just explain that I was actually living with my grandparents when I was in 12th grade, for a lot of reasons that just really have to do with the fact that my parents both got remarried and married partners that really didn't want to deal with their children. And by the time I was 16, I literally had had enough with all of them and said, I'm just going to live with my grandparents, finish out my high school years. And there was a time when I was like, I'm going to be a regular pioneer. So I was an overachiever. So whatever I was a part of, I wanted to be like the top. So being a part of Jehovah Witness, I said, what is it? What is the highest level that a woman can attain? She could be a regular pioneer, a special pioneer. She can go where the need is great. She can marry a man that has a big title, and then, she can be associated with him. So, but individually, the highest thing that a woman can do is be a special pioneer. I have to take a minute to explain an epiphany that I had, which was a huge, huge epiphany for me about this cult. And I do want to talk about that in a separate video. It was really interesting to me because I did talk about one component of this cult, which is the apocalyptic component. So the apocalyptic component is comprised of the side of this organization that has always uh, talked about the fact that they would be able to say when the end of the world was going to happen. And if you look at pictures from the beginning of the, inception of this organization and the many changes that's going through, there were literally people with signs talking about the end of the world is near. So that is a huge component of it. So when people ask me, what's the Jehovah's Witness called? I always tell them it's two parts to it. There's one part of it that is an apocalyptic cult. Apocalyptic in that they believe they can tell and foretell the coming of the end of the world. The second part of it is much more interesting in that it is a publication empire. And all of the people that are in those congregations are literally being trained to be unpaid workers for this publishing empire. What you're taught to do and what the majority of your time is peddling the publications. And they have a huge system in place. It's really interesting. I'm not going to totally get into it because I really want to get into the Disfellowshipping part. But it's really interesting once you understand sales dynamics and you understand, because I'm like, those conventions were sales conventions. They were, because every time there was a special talk on Sunday, it was all about a new publication. And everybody ran and bought it. So, and it's really funny because all of your reinforcement, all of your accolades, all of the things that you receive in terms of confirmation in this organization has to do with how long you're out peddling their publications and how many hours you put in of unpaid work. So they even have you going to their, Bethel, and they're just giving you the bare minimal for existence so that you can sit there and give your time to peddling their publications. Again, I've done a lot of research because I'm very, very well connected. I'm actually even surprised at myself at how far I've been actually able to go in life. But I feel like I'm pretty fearless in a lot of ways, and that's really helped me to be able to interact with people that I never ever thought that I would interact with. And um and that's actually helped me to find out things that most people would never find out about. And I have to be sort of ambiguous about how far I've actually been able to rise in society. But let me just tell you that that's one of the reasons that I can talk about some of these things unequivocally. So, two parts to the Jehovah Witness cult: apocalyptic and the publishing empire. The whole way that the congregations are set up, the conventions are set up, the Bethels are set up is to basically support peddling the merchandise. So getting back to my plan to leave the organization, and how I devised to do it. I started writing letters. I started um, devising a plan of how I was going to do it. I realized that I wanted to go to college, and what's really funny is I was just totally obsessed with the Cosby Show when I was growing up. I loved that there was this upper class African American family that went to these historically black colleges and universities. That was so unlike anything that I had ever seen in my family. However, as I mentioned before, I was actually very smart and was able to, I was in gifted classes, scholar classes. I took the top classes. In fact, when I was in high school, I had actually graduated. My last year, I actually only needed one class. So I actually graduated with quite a few extra credits that were used towards college, because I was literally done by the time I got to the 12th grade. There was nothing else that they could give me. There was nothing else I could do. I had been working and studying at a 12th grade level when I was in the fifth grade. And that's because I went to the top school in my state. My brother and I went to the top school in my state, and it's still the top school in my state. And it's still one of the top schools, private or public, in the United States. So I was I was ready. I was ready to take on the world. So I wanted to go to college, and I figured out how I was going to be able to do it without giving away too much information. There was something that happened to me when I was younger that involved a cash settlement. So I was able to receive a cash settlement when I was 17 years old. And it was a lot of money. It was a huge amount of money. It was enough money for me to live and do a lot, um, without needing my family for anything. So, and as I mentioned in my other videos, there's things that I'm not going to talk about too much because I don't really think it's relevant to my actual story. And then there are things that I may bring up in a separate topic down the line if I think it's appropriate in helping someone. But just for the context of this story, I got a lot of money when I was 17, which helped me to be able to come up with an exit plan. And I was not going to write a letter of disassociation. I was not going to meet with a judicial committee. I really stopped going to the Kingdom Hall. The issue was that my grandfather was a presiding overseer, and I lived with him, and we had the Bible study in our house. So that was really interesting. I was also like the favorite grandchild because I was peculiar. I was very, very smart. I was, very talented. I was winning awards for writing. So my grandparents just doted on me in a lot of ways, And because of that, I was able to kind of explain myself out of certain things. I wasn't able to get away with it forever because there was a huge confrontation, because the brothers were starting to ask my grandfather, "Where am I and why am I not coming to Kingdom Hall?" And my grandmother, because they give a lot of grief to parents, whomever you're living with as a family member. If you stop going to the Kingdom Hall, trust me, they will tear them up, especially if they have any type of positions of authority. So, and they use a lot of scriptures. I mean, they were just really messing my grandfather. I literally was trying to just get through high school. I wanted to graduate and then I was going to leave. So, there was quite a few confrontations that were actually shocking to me. And if I could have done it differently, I would have. My father even came up, confronted me, and I was just a pit bull. And I basically just said I didn't agree with the doctrine. And there were like some huge issues that I had. And a lot of it had to do with um, how females were treated. I did not agree with the way that homosexuals were treated. I believe that people are homosexual. And I feel like there's no one sin that's over another sin. They're all sins. But if a person is gay, then they should not be treated as lepers. So I totally had a problem with that because I had gay friends that I knew in high school. And I feel like, 10% of the population is going to be gay whether you like it or not. So I don't believe that, and, if they get married and they have a family, why do you care? So I didn't agree with the blood doctrine. By that time, I haven't really gone on into this in depth because I do want to talk about this in a separate video. Is that I did lose, my stepbrother died because of the blood the blood policy, and I had a lot of issues with that. So again, I planned my exit. I was trying to do the fade away, go to a meeting here and there, lots of confrontations. So let me tell you, I was confronted quite a bit. And I was just not going to back down because I knew I had money. I was applying to colleges. I was like, I'm about to bounce. And pretty much graduated from high school and did. And was sidestepping meeting with the elders, wasn't about to get pulled in no judicial committee because again, both sides of my family are Jehovah's Witnesses and have been for generations. Where my family lives, they're huge. It's a huge family and friends. When my mother died and I went back to the Kingdom Hall, I think that was actually the last time I've been to Kingdom Hall. It was just seeing people that I've known since I was born was interesting. Just seeing people and it's hard to separate that, because these are people that, you've had so many wonderful memories with. And when you had those memories, when you went to a picnic or you went, to, an amusement park or you went to eat, you're not thinking about it in the context of being in a witness religion, or you remember something funny that you did with that person. You don't think about it in the context of the cult that you were in. You just remember the closeness. And I think that's the human side where it's hard. They want you to turn that off. And just because my ideology and my thinking is different from yours doesn't mean that I'm now this terrible person that you have to act like you don't know. And let me tell you, not every single Jehovah Witness can do it. Because when my mom died, when my brother died, I saw people they just couldn't. Some risk being disfellowship because it's people that you've known. They knew my parents. They knew my, it's not easy. So, and it's not a straightforward policy on, it is a straightforward policy, excuse me, but how people interpret it They pick and choose. So my experience is somewhat significant, but I did in fact get this fellowship. I got this fellowship, excuse me, and I got this fellowship not for sin, even though that's what brought me into a judicial committee. And I'll get into that in my next video. So, a JW sympathizer that was a member of my family found out that I was doing some things that involved her child, who was not a witness and had no intention of ever being a witness. And she's actually one of the few people that I actually still have a relationship with. It's really interesting. And my family member was the first person to leave the organization. She was disfellowship. However, she is a JW sympathizer. And depending on what it is and the topic, is how she's going to react. But she has no problem turning people in if she thinks they're doing something. And I'm a very down to earth person, but I do have a strong personality. I'm certainly an alpha person. So I do, I don't think I'm too blunt, but if I come off as being blunt in my videos, I want to apologize in advance. It's just I have a very direct personality. So, yeah, I was just really, confronting my aunt, like, listen, you're not a Jehovah's Witness anymore. You don't have to, follow their guidelines, and this is this whole Stockholm thing. So, but she didn't like the fact that I had taken her child with me, doing some things. So she had to discipline me in a way that she saw fit. So I had faded away. I was living my life. I was going to college, and I had a boyfriend. I had definitely dated. Had thought I was in love with somebody, and had committed fornication, but I wasn't out in the street. I'm still a fairly conservative person, and I really believe that in a context of a serious relationship that I'm okay with that. I don't believe in haphazardly just doing it with anybody, but I certainly felt that the way that I was doing things was appropriate. Although in hindsight, I did get a little wild for a minute, and I calmed down. But my aunt, she confronted me and she said, "You're gonna have to tell the brothers what you've been doing, because you haven't been going." This is, again, I've been in college. I'm living my life, doing my own thing, and I get forced to go and tell them. Here's the funny part, and this is the politics I mentioned in my previous video. Because my grandfather was a presiding overseer, and because a lot of them knew me, they were not ready to disfellowship me. I had absolutely no idea what a judicial committee was really about. If I would have known, I would have never joined this group. It was the most horrific, invasive thing I had ever experienced up until then. And what really made it worse is that I knew these people. They had barely graduated high school. I felt like I was on trial. I felt like, and this is the part that I have to emphasize, this is my in contempt feeling again. How dare you ask me these personal questions to the extent that they did? I felt raped. I literally felt raped, and I felt that they were getting off on it. And when I went, I really had no idea. I really went in like I thought, okay, I'm going to confess, I'm going to read some scriptures and make a decision. I did not realize that they were going to ask me, questions that I felt were completely out of line. They wanted graphic details. They wanted to know about orgasms and ejaculations and, positions. And I got to the point where I literally was so uncomfortable that I looked and I said, I'm not answering any more of these questions. And I completely shut down because, again, I'm not on trial. You, what, I committed a sin. I'm coming to confess that sin. I'm not on trial. You are not qualified to be the judge and jury for me. And you're not qualified to, I'm not charged with a crime. Um, so one of the brothers who actually was my grandfather's best friend, he saw my face and he was like, okay, we can move on, because I was really just like, I'm about to change my tone and I'm about to get very, very nasty. And I'm only going through this because I didn't want my family member to trump me, but I also had a lot of respect for my grandparents, and I would never do anything to hurt them intentionally. It was something that I did, and the way that I justified is that I did join a group, and I knew that the group had some rules and regulations that I did not uphold. I was sorry about it, but the part that got me to fellowship, and again, this is really interesting, is that they wanted me to come back to Kingdom Hall, and they started asking me questions about what I thought about the doctrine. And I was like, I'm still working that out. So I saw in another video, like, and they were like, listen, we just want you to consider coming back to the Kingdom Hall. Your grandfather, we love him so much, which is real interesting when I tell some more of my story. Um, you're a great publisher. You give great talks. The kids look up to you. Blah blah blah. We've missed you. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna play this along a little bit. So I said, okay, I think about it. But I was in a different space. I was horrified at what I had just went through. I never experienced anything like it. I felt completely violated, and I was done. Now, if there was any question about whether I wanted to leave this organization completely, it was answered in that judicial committee. Because let me tell you something, I would never be a part of an organization that does that to young people. I don't agree with it. I feel like these men are unqualified, they're uneducated, they don't have any degrees in anything. They're being taught through doctrine that has nothing to do with dealing with kids and young adults that don't have any world experience, that are still growing and figuring things out. That's not the way you handle things. And I would never put my kids through that. I would never knowingly do something like that. It's not that deep to me. I'm not going to be a part of an organization that is that controlling and that authoritarian. It's just not anything that I believe in. I don't believe that, as I mentioned, I'm not Christian, but if you go by even the disciples, that was not the way that they handled things. I feel like the interpretation of the scriptures and the way that